Good morning. We're getting ready to start this meeting for Johnny Thomas. We have Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, Johnny's parents, the occupational therapist, Miss Gwen, the physical therapist, Miss Hollis, the speech pathologist, Mr. Simmons, and Coach Berry, the PE coach. We will be going over Mr. and Mrs. Thomas' parental rights concerning their son, Johnny. The procedure safeguard is important because it makes you, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, as parents aware of your rights, which pertains to the special education evaluation and placement process. You, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, have the right to attend your child's eligibility, reevaluation, and the IEP team meetings. You will receive a copy of all documents at the end of this meeting. Your child Johnny records are private. You are the only one besides the employees who works with Johnny can review Johnny's records without your permission. You can request to have something changed or removed in Johnny's records, and you also have the right to add information, comments, or data to Johnny's records. And what that means is, Mr. and Mrs. Johnny, that if someone comes in and wants to see Johnny's records without your written permission, they cannot review Johnny's records. Only those staff members, employees who are working with Johnny are able to see Johnny's records. You have any questions? Okay. Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, you will receive a written notice prior to any meetings that the school have for Johnny. The school cannot test, evaluate, or change Johnny's placement without your written consent. You, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, have the right to take away your consent in writing to special education and related services. And what that means is that the school cannot do anything or change anything without your permission. And you have to write it. It has to be a consent in writing before before the school can be able to test or anything. If English were not your native language, you would have been provided a translator by the school district. Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, do you or anyone on the team have any questions or concerns? Okay, thank you. As a parent, you, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, have the right to disagree with the school's evaluations. You have a right to have your child tested by a professional evaluator that's not employed by the school district at the public or private expense. The school must provide you with a list of evaluators. Your child's current placement can remain the same until your child has been reevaluated and the IEP team determines if your child has a disability or needs special education. And all that is saying is that, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, if you don't agree with the evaluation that the school has done, you have the right to have Johnny tested by someone that's not part of the school district. And the school have to provide you with a list for you to choose to. And doing this, your child, Johnny, is able to stay where he's at until the second evaluation has been done by the professional. And once it has been done by the other professional evaluator, then the IEP team will come back together and determine if Johnny has a disability or needs special education. Do you have any questions concerning the evaluation? Okay, thank you. Both parents, you, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, and the school district can request mediation or a due process hearing if there is any disagreement along with any part of the progress about Johnny's placement or services. And that means that if you're not satisfied, or if you think that Johnny's placements or services is not correct for him, then you can request a due process hearing. And before the due process hearing is scheduled, both the parents and the school have to sit down and try to come up with an agreement about Johnny's placement or his services. If the parent, you as a parent, and the school are not able to come to an agreement, then a due process hearing will be scheduled. Is there any questions? All right, Mr. and Mrs. Johnny, and in the documents that you have, that you're gonna receive at the end of this meeting, we'll have 2 sites that you can go on to get other references or other sources if needed. You can go on to the Georgia Department of Education on the homepage, and it has a whole list of things that you can just click on, and it will give you more information and resources if needed. You can also go on the U.S. Department of Education on IDEA. That will give you more resources that you can look into if needed. I want to thank you all for this meeting. And Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, you have my information. If any questions or concerns come up later on, you're welcome to send me an email or my phone number. You can give me a call, and we can set up a time and a day and a time so that we can get together to discuss your concerns or questions that you may have to have about concerning Johnny. Thank you. Thank you for everyone for this meeting this morning.